Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the afternoon series of our six webinars this afternoon, or six webinars today. We've obviously spent the morning looking at governance. We've looked at health and safety, and that's both slips, trips and falls, but also how to manage psychological health in the workplace. And then this afternoon, we're moving on to possibly a little bit more around the technical aspects of what Risk Evolves does. As previously, for those of you that have been with us throughout the day, this webinar is being recorded and will be available on the website, certainly by Monday morning. For those of you that are not familiar with GoToWebinar, there is a questions button on the side where you can type in any questions as we go through, and certainly chat with any of the organisers, any of the presenters if you feel like doing so. Just as a placeholder as well, we have our next series of webinars on June the 23rd, and if you'd like to influence what we cover in those sessions, whether it be health and safety, GDPR, or anything else that Risk Evolves covers, then please put that into the chat box as well. When the webinar finishes, there will be a very short questionnaire. It's not going to be a long questionnaire, certainly just a couple of questions on how you found the webinar. Was it interesting? Did it meet your objectives? And again, is there anything that you'd like to see in the future? Right, what's this webinar about? So in the afternoon session now, we're going to be covering sustainability ratings. And I'm really delighted to be joined for this session by Dr. Maniba Kara, who's worked with Risk Evolves for a couple of years now, but as an employee has absolutely led and driven some of the work that Risk Evolves has been successful in doing when it comes to our sustainability achievements. I'm going to hand over to Maniba in a moment, but this is an area where we see growing demands on organisations, regardless of who you are, regardless of the sector in which you do business, regardless of your organisational size. We're all being asked to demonstrate what our environmental, our social and our governance credentials are. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Maniba. As I said before, if you have any questions, then feel free to ask them as we go through the presentation. Maniba, over to you.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everyone. And just before we dive into the sustainability ratings, at least our journey, just a bit about Risk Evolves and what we do. I know Helen does this way more eloquently than I do, but we are definitely compliance geeks, and we can do everything from risk management right down to your health and safety. For more information, please visit our website. All right, so now on to the interesting stuff. Sustainability ratings. Risk Evolves recently went through 2 accreditation processes, one with EcoVadis and the second with B Corp. But before I go on that journey, I'd like to start off by explaining what a sustainability rating is. And to do that, I just need to look at some of the history of where sustainability ratings actually emerged from. So this is an image that many people might be familiar with, and it is a summary of the UN Sustainable Development Goals that emerged out of one of the COP summits almost 30 years ago. It's a big number, 30 years. And it actually documents 17 key development goals that they measure, or that they use to measure sustainability of countries. And we're very familiar with, for example, number 13, which looks at climate action, or some of the others around energy, for example, number 7. But less familiar would be goals like number 8 that looks at working environments, or number 17 that looks at sustainable partnerships. And from these sustainability goals came the question of, well, how do you then translate goals into actions, and how do you measure that? It's at this point that we began seeing the word corporate social responsibility emerge, or this concept of corporate social responsibility, which tried its best to document or create a framework that can measure and monitor the effectiveness of actions to achieve the UN sustainability goals. The CSR became the very qualitative expression of those goals. And when I say qualitative, what we would often find is policies or commitments and statements that align to achieving the UN sustainability goals. But again, how we measure those actions wasn't fully covered. And there was a bit of a shortage or a disparity from this heavily qualitative framework that didn't quite give a material value to the actions that were being done. Closely linked to the CSR is this pyramid, which is sometimes known as the CSR pyramid, and it actually documents the 4 key categories that most of the UN sustainability goals actually fit into, whether it's around economic responsibility, legal responsibility, ethical responsibility, and then philanthropic responsibility, and that is being a good corporate citizen and everything around give back. But once again, what was missing was the measurement of how effective these actions were. Thus enters the idea of the ESG, or environmental, social, and governance agenda almost. And what this tried to do was give equal focus across the key areas of the UN sustainability goals, but also give a more quantitative expression to the actions to achieve those goals. So what we landed up with were these 2 different frameworks, one that was very heavily qualitative and looked at policies and procedures, and the second that was very quantitative and looked at a lot of statistics and things that you could actually measure. But the middle ground arose in terms of a sustainability rating, which really tries to bring representation and expression to both elements. So where you get the detail in the written narrative, but you also get the value in having hard numbers to assess your performance. When it comes down to sustainability rating agencies, as much as Risk Evolves has gone through the ratings agencies or rating prescriptions of EcoVadis and B Corp, there are actually a large number of rating agencies that exist. Some are newer to the market, some have been around for many years, such as S&P Global Ratings, which look at stocks and rating the sustainability of stocks. Recent to the market is the Moody's ESG Solutions for SMEs. But one of the key challenges when looking at a ratings agency is the fact that at the moment it's not regulated by any legislation or regulation, and there's no standardization. So these are just one of the key considerations when looking at a rating agency. So as we come now to our actual journey, I've given you some of the history of how sustainability ratings emerged and what we're trying to achieve. So when Risk Evolves began this journey, we asked ourselves, well, one of the key things we asked ourselves is, how do we approach the sustainable ratings, or what's the method that we're going to use? At present, there's almost 4 major categories of ratings that one can go for. And these are divided into, or these are split at least across methods that are either qualitatively heavy or quantitatively heavy. And in this table is actually just a bit of an analysis that we did when assessing our own needs. And we looked at, for example, PAS 2060, or the use of ISO standards, and then, of course, ratings agencies such as EcoVadis and B Corp. And this table just summarizes what each of these methods, what they're based on, their history, and what you're going to get out of it. And these were some of the key considerations. So just starting at the top left at the PAS 2060, it originated from the Kyoto Protocol that was one of the first iterations of how do we begin to measure, or how do we begin to achieve and measure our UN goals, but specifically around climate change. The PAS 2060 is based on the ISO 14064 standard, and in terms of its CSR focus, it's very environmentally focused, in that the majority of the PAS is centered around your carbon neutrality or your environmental impact as it translates into emissions. So you very much miss out on those softer elements, or the CSR side of things. So it's very ESG oriented. In terms of the certification, there are 3 levels or 3 types of certificates that can come out of it. For example, self-validation, unaccredited, and then of course third-party, where you'd go to a third-party accreditation to get a certificate. But then just moving on, we looked at other ISO standards such as 14001 and 45000, which was a consideration to add to our repertoire of standards that we've got. But again, in looking at all of these, it was a question of, does it meet our needs? And this forced us to actually take a step back. After assessing what's available in terms of rating, to take a step back and ask some key questions around what we're trying to achieve by going for these ratings. Why are we doing this? And of course, looking at the time versus output. To go for another ISO standard might have been a relatively easy accomplishment, but in terms of what is the significance of that output, whether it's just a certificate, or what actions is it going to force us to do, other considerations were around cost and then benefits. And when we talk benefits, one of the key things is there any competitive advantage? And no, that's not the only reason to do something like a sustainability rating, but it is a consideration when looking at cost benefit in an organization. And then, of course, it does come down to a part of the why is well, it's the right thing to do, as Helen would often say, because it's a good thing to know where you're standing and to be part of this global movement and be part of the leaders that enact change or encourage change around us. So once we had the why, and that helped us determine which was the best course of action to actually take. And that's where we settled on the EcoVadis and the B Corp. Now, we had actually initially
before you go on, Monique, just go back to that slide. But there was another reason why we considered it as well. So one of the underlying principles of Risk Evolves is that we would never ask a customer to do something that we ourselves would not do. And what we've begun to see was an increase in appetite for standards and certifications such as EcoVadis and B Corp. So it was very much as well working internally to better position ourselves to support our clients to achieve these certification ratings as well. And you're right, 14001 is a relatively easy standard for a professional services company to achieve. Relatively easy, everything's relative obviously, but I felt that B Corp and EcoVadis would absolutely stretch us and potentially therefore stretch our clients into areas, especially in the sustainability and especially when it came, especially in the social and governance areas, more so than 14001 would do in just environmental. So that's where my head was as well.
And that's spoken from the leader's point of view. On a very serious note, from our MD's point of view, and I think perhaps that speaks positively to the different conversations that can be had in the different levels in an organization. Yeah. Right.
Sorry, so I've broken your stride.
No, not at all. But just coming into our journey, we actually started with the B Corp certification with a B Impact assessment, and that is at the moment appears to be the gold standard in sustainability ratings. The B Corp is divided, well, the question set is starting at about 200 questions, and as you select or as you're able to answer a question, it actually unlocks a number of other questions. So at the beginning, it did seem like it was endless questionnaire, but we got there in the end. And we began the B Corp, it was late June or around July. And when we looked at actually the assessment and the weighting the time that was going to be needed to do the assessment, that's when the interest fell then on EcoVadis to look at how these two rating agencies actually compared and what the difference between them are. So once we submitted our B Corp and we're waiting for assessment in around October, we started the EcoVadis questionnaire. Now, just on this timeline that's represented here, there's 4 key stages in the sustainability ratings that are quite static across all ratings agencies and follow very much the same process. And that looks at like your discovery and your emissions calculations. You then move into stage 2, which is around compiling evidence and gap closing. And then, of course, there's submission and review and award. So we followed the same process, well, the same stages for both the B Corp and the EcoVadis, but the time and the extent of the questions, I think, varied greatly. EcoVadis only has 80 questions, and I say only has 80 questions, but for each of those questions, you need to provide evidence, and it's evidence from everything from policies to training records to, again, everything that's questions that are aligned to meeting those 17 UN sustainability goals. And then just when it came down to the assessment time, the average waiting time for EcoVadis is estimated at about 3 months. We got our award, I think, within 3 weeks, if that's correct, Helen. And that was a bit of a surprise. the reasons behind that is some of our other clients that's gone through it waited on average of 2.5 to 3 months. Yeah, we don't actually know why it took. It was such a short wait. But anyway, as for B Corp, the estimated time was 12 months, and managed to close that in about 5 months. So the difficult thing about these assessments is that it is an online tool, it is an online assessment, and there's no person to actually talk to, and that can be a bit difficult because there's nobody to really ask any questions to. But nevertheless, we've now ended off March with both a B Corp and an EcoVadis rating on both ends. Just one last thing, EcoVadis, the ratings is a score out of 100 that then translates into one of 4 badges, which can be bronze, silver, gold, or platinum. Platinum is only 1% of the total EcoVadis subscribers, and when it comes to B Corp, the end result is a score out of 200, and you do need a minimum score of 88 from your initial answer sheet to qualify for any further verification or assessment. Okay. And then just sort of moving into the end of my presentation is looking at some lessons learned during this exercise. So as I've said, or as we've got documented at the bottom of our slides, Risk Evolves holds a number of certificates that ensure or assure the governance within the organization, but it still highlighted a number of gaps. So number one, there's always going to be gaps to fill no matter where you're starting. But the key point of this is that no one is ever starting from zero. And one of the key highlights from us and from the experience of helping other organizations through this process is that you're actually doing or typically doing a lot more than you think you are. And then lastly, it's always about looking at how different frameworks can be integrated, because it's not just about creating another set of documentation or more and more paperwork that will need to be looked after. It's actually just about looking how it can be integrated into current systems or into current processes of work. And just to the right of the slide, there's a little organogram picture that will just comically show that everybody's on a path somewhere, and all 6 of our key pillars at least link, and you're always somewhere on that journey. Now that I've finished rambling, Helen, I'm going to hand over back to you.
Really brilliant, Maniba. And it's really hard, isn't it, to summarise our investment of, actually it's not just the last 3-6 months in terms of doing the actual submission process, but the work that's gone on before as well in terms of building an organisation that can meet the requirements of either EcoVadis or B Corp. I think the other important thing to say as well is it forced us to reflect on the work that we do, such as delivering these free webinars, for example, that we thought didn't count to the B Corp or didn't count towards the EcoVadis, but because again it's about that societal step, the fact that we are supporting organisations that would potentially not have this type of education, we were able to evidence that again, and that fed into both the B Corp and the EcoVadis. The other thing as well for leaders who are on this call, the one thing that B Corp also requires that you do, and again, it was easy for Risk Evolves to do this because I'd already signed up to the Better Business Act. And for those of you that were on the call first thing this morning when we spoke about good governance, the Better Business Act in the UK is a lobby group. And literally just search for Google for Better Business Act, betterbusinessact.org, and it's a lobby group. And what this group is lobbying for is for environmental, social and governance to be part of the regulatory framework for every single company in the UK, and therefore to make it a requirement under the Companies Act 2016 that businesses do that. I'd signed up to that, as I really do believe that in order for us to make a difference to the planet and to society, you can't rely on governments. You cannot rely on governments to legislate, and that's because governments shouldn't necessarily have to legislate. This is about businesses doing the right thing because they should do. So therefore, when we were asked to change, or when I was asked to change the Articles of Association and Memorandum to make it a legal responsibility for Risk Evolves directors to sign up to all the principles of B Corp, it was an easy thing to do. In terms of practical terms, my accountant helped me through how we actually made those changes. But it was a relatively easy step to make on the journey, and it's shown that now I'm legally committed to making this change. And I think one of the challenges with any type of certification process, it can always be it's just another certificate on the wall, it's another tick in the box. But actually making that step change and changing the articles of memorandum means that it's absolutely not just a certificate on the wall. It's not just a tick in the box. It's something that I am now legally obliged to deliver to my organisation, for my employees and for our clients and customers. So that was one big thing that came out of B Corp. I think coming out of EcoVadis as well was, and Maniba's absolutely spot on, is that we didn't start from zero, and none of the organisations that we've worked with have started from zero. There is always something that's happening within the organisation that supports the certification process. EcoVadis there wasn't somebody there on hand to help you. EcoVadis has got quite a good knowledge portal that can help you with templates and so on if required. B Corp, once you're into the verification process, then you do have somebody that actually works with you and steps through the verification exercises of all the evidence that you do have to submit. In terms of resource, it's not for the faint-hearted. I will say that it's not for the faint-hearted. If you're an SME, Risk Evolves employs six employees, including myself, and has a number of associates. Maniba was working on this quite a lot of the time, and that was down in some instances to understanding exactly what our carbon footprint was. And I know, Maniba, you're going to talk about that probably as part of a session next time, about how you go about creating and understanding what your carbon footprint is, how we offset that. And this is where, again, the ISO standards are absolutely brilliant. It's not now just about we've achieved EcoVadis Gold, we've achieved B Corp. It's about right now, all we have to do is we have to continue to improve. We have to continue to embed this as part of the management system that Risk Evolves does. Again, because we've got ISO certifications such as 9 and 27, that continuous improvement is part of our DNA. But equally, you think about yourself in your own businesses. If you haven't got a 9001, then no business stands still. In actual fact, if a business does stand still, if it fails to evolve, then it's not going to be in business for very long. And we know, therefore, that making steps to ensure that we continue to reduce our carbon footprint, that we continue to give back to do societal support, that we continue to educate and train people, that I continue to recruit a diverse a group of people into the company, that we continue to support our clients in their journey as well to achieving environmental, sustainable and governance goals, is all part of that continual improvement journey. So yeah, it's definitely not a certificate on the wall. It's definitely a behaviour, it's a culture, which again, as we were talking about this morning with governance, the tone from the top is key. Absolutely, tone from the top is key. I think the other key thing as well I point out as well is that there are increasingly a number of other artefacts that the government's produced that can help you with this. And there's lots of other organisations, in terms of if you need to offset carbon, then there's organisations that can do that in a way that is also sustainable and recognisable. We chose to offset our carbon, which wasn't a huge amount, with an organisation that itself is a B Corp company. And I guess it's probably important as well just to talk a little bit about B Corp. You may not be familiar with B Corp. It started out with as an American organisation. It's growing, absolutely growing. There's about 670 companies in the UK that are B Corp companies, and some of those names you're going to recognise. Some of those products you'll see if you go into stores like Waitrose, for example, and if you look on the Ocado website, for example, you can search on just B Corp companies, and those are going to be people like Innocent Smoothies. They are, I think it's Ella's Foods if you have baby food, etc. So some of these are real household names that you'll recognise. Cook Foods is another obvious one. So lots of rambling. We've had a question come in terms of cost, and is it an annual certification? So yeah, really good point, that question that was raised. Two differences here, aren't there, Maniba, between EcoVadis and between B Corp? Do you want to explain how the certification works for EcoVadis versus B Corp?
Sure. So sorry, I've just actually brought up that comparative table. So in terms of certification, EcoVadis is an annual recert. And in terms of costing, you could either sign up for an annual or a yearly cost, or pay on a yearly basis, or you can tie yourself into a 3-year contract, which comes at a bit of a discount. In terms of B Corp, costs are determined on your revenue, no, turnover, company turnover, and it's a percentage or determined on your company turnover, and that's done on a 3-year cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it is worth looking at and obviously understanding what that cost of certification will be on your budget. There are discounts available actually for both EcoVadis and B Corp. So, EcoVadis, for example, there is a discount if you buy a 3-year certification pack. I can't remember the exact discount numbers. B Corp is a really interesting one. And it's interesting talking to another business owner. He went, I'm not sure I was comfortable with that, but there are discounts available as well if you're a female-led, if you are led by and other groups as well, which will reduce that original price tag depending on what your leadership structure is. So definitely worth investigating. And of course, the team here at Risk Evolves are very happy to help and support anybody with understanding what they need to do, and equally to help them on that journey. I know, Maniba, when we started going through, especially B Corp, we thought 200 questions, yeah, we could do this. And then it started expanding from 200 to 300. And yeah, it was a lot of questions, wasn't it? But we got there, and it was a really good learning journey for us. So yeah, absolutely would encourage anybody to do this. And of course, we know as well as part of supply chain questionnaires that the credentials are being requested now for companies. What are you doing? If you are aware of some of the new reporting guidelines for larger companies, some of the oh, Renee, you're going to have to help me on this, the SECRA reporting guidelines.
ECR.
There we go.
The ECCR, so it's the, oh gosh, it's escaped me, but it's the ECCR regulation. Yeah.
So if you're a company over a certain size, then you're going to need to report on that. And similarly, we know that those organisations will be looking at what their supply chain is doing to support them. And in fact, that's where the requirements for the clients that we've worked with have come from. It's all been supply chain driven, where in order for a client to enter the supply chain for potentially a new customer set, they've had to gain EcoVadis or B Corp to enter in. So expect to see a lot more of this. Expect to see more of this driven down. And one of the things, as I said, I wanted Risk Evolves to be very much leaders on this, to be thought leaders on around how we can support businesses to achieve. Would we come to you for advice to work out which cert is best for us? That's a good question that's come in as well. Yes, absolutely. It's possible that B Corp is more appropriate for some organisations. EcoVadis may be more appropriate. PAS 2060 might be appropriate for your business, and that's going to be very much based on timescales, what your clients and customers may be expecting. Budgets, I would add, is part of that as well, and also probably where you are in your journey as well at the moment. So which is easier to achieve for you? Is it going to be an EcoVadis? Is it going to be a PAS 2060? Perhaps you've already got the framework of the ISOs in place, and 14001 may be a more appropriate stepping stone and a milestone to achieve something else. But definitely we're very happy to come and talk to any leadership teams on what our experience has been and some of the challenges that we've had on that journey. So we are 2 minutes before the bottom of the hour. Maniba, any other final thoughts from you? Any other thoughts that we should have?
The sooner that you start, the better.
That's a good one. Yeah. Every journey starts with a single step, as they say. So as there's no more questions, I'm going to thank everybody for attending this session. Our next session at 3 o'clock is all on cyber essentials and the various changes that have occurred with the new question set that was announced in January. If you are able to join us on that call, very much looking forward to seeing you. As a reminder, the next date of our webinars is June the 23rd, and this session will be recorded and is available on the website. Thank you very much for attending.